This video is going to look at how to find more descriptors of data in Excel. So I'm working with the same data that I used in the mean, median, and mode video that hopefully you watched previous to this one. So we know that we find the mean of the data set by using that equals average function. Then the median is the equals median function. Why is that not showing up? I'll retype it in. So the equals median function. There we go. And then the mode for this one, we just looked and we saw that 94 and 88 both showed up 3 times each, so we called that the mode. Another measure of data is the range, and this tells us how far it is from the maximum to the minimum data point. And to find the range, we just do this by hand. If your data is sorted, it's pretty easy. We just do equals and then click on the maximum, which is up at the top, minus the minimum, which is down at the bottom. So our range of this data is 39. Now, your book talks a lot about the difference between population standard deviation and sample standard deviation. Population standard deviation is when we're working with the entire data set for the whole population, and the sample standard deviation is when we're working with a sample of data points that is just sum of the points from the whole population, and we're using that sample to approximate what we think is going on for the whole population. In the real world, if you're talking about standard deviation, it's always assumed that you're talking about the sample standard deviation because you almost never have the entire population's worth of data. I teach the statistics course here at Wake Tech, and we talk a lot in that class about how it's impractical to think we have the whole population when we're working with the data set. You almost never have it. So anytime you see something where it just says find the standard deviation, you can assume that means the sample standard deviation because most of the time, almost all the time, you're just working with a sample. So to find the sample standard deviation in new versions of Excel, it's equals stdev.s, open parenthesis, and that .s just stands for sample, and then you highlight your data and click OK. In the new versions of Excel, you would use stdev.p, P for population, if you were trying to find the population standard deviation. Old versions of Excel don't use the period, but new versions need it. So our sample standard deviation is about 11.7, and that tells us that most of the data falls within about 11 or 12 units from the mean. So if our mean is 82, if we subtract 12 from it, that's about 70. And if we add 12 to it, that's about 94. And if we look at the range from 70 to 94, would you agree that that's most of the data? That's almost all of it. So in our standard deviation, this is just telling us the span around the mean where we find most of our data. So one other way to describe data that I don't think is mentioned in your book is the 5-number summary. And we're going to cover it here, even though I don't think it's in your book. And the 5-number summary is comprised of the minimum, what we call the first quartile or the Q1, the median, then the third quartile or Q3, and the maximum. And for this one, just since I've got minimum on top and maximum on bottom, I'm going to resort my data so it's smallest to largest, so it matches up. So, since we're looking at minimum on top and maximum on bottom, I want to put my minimum on top and my maximum on the bottom. It changed my range a little bit because now it's doing minimum minus max. I can fix that right quick. Range is max minus min. You don't really have to resort your data. I just did that because it matches better. So our minimum up here is 55. Our median, we already saw our median is 88. And then our maximum is 94. So those three we already know. So the last two values that we need to talk about are Q1 and Q3. These tell us what is the median of the first half of the data, and then what is the median of the second half of the data. So let's look. We've got 22 data points. So our top half would be comprised of the top 11 data points, and the bottom half is the bottom 11. So I'm just splitting my data set into two halves. And technically the median is averaging the two middle numbers. Since there's not one single number in the middle, there's two numbers that share the middle. Technically the median, we take 88 plus 88 and divide it by 2, which gives us 88, which isn't really all that exciting. But just know that technically if you've got an even number of data points like we have in this case, there's 22 data points, the median is found by averaging the two middle numbers. So to find Q1, we need to find the median of the top half of the data. So I'm going to do equals median and then highlight just the top half of the data. So the Q1 value is 74, and it thinks I'm forgetting data points. I'm not, it's okay. And then for Q3, we find the median of the bottom half of the data, which is 90. So we see that our minimum value is 55. Our median we said was technically splitting the two middle. Then our max was the 94. So our Q1 was 74, which is, see, these were 11 data points. So it is the center of the 11. It's the point that has 5 below it and 5 above it. And then the center of these 11 would be this one, to have 5 below and 5 above in that top half. So the 5-number summary splits our data into equal chunks where we've got about a quarter of the data between the minimum and Q1. We have about a quarter of the data between Q1 and the median. There's about a quarter between the median and Q3, and then there's about a quarter of the data between Q3 and Q4, or the maximum. And again, this is just another helpful way that you can describe how the data is spread out.